It was a Thursday afternoon when my life started to unravel, quietly, politely, like a thread slipping from a seam. Seattle was gray as usual, the kind of dull that seeps into your skin and makes even good news sound subdued. I was wrapping up my last session of the day when Emily Hayes sat forward on my couch, twisting a tissue in her lap, her knuckles pale. "Dear Bennett," she hesitated, eyes darting toward the floor. "Can I tell you something that might sound insane?" I smiled gently, professionally. "I've heard plenty of insane. That's what I'm here for." She leaned in, voice low. "My son. I think he was conceived with the wrong donor." My therapist instincts kicked in. I asked the usual things. What made her believe that? Was she sure? Had she confirmed anything? Emily nodded slowly and pulled out a printed donor profile from her purse. "We went with donor ID 112A. I don't know, but the more I look at it," her voice cracked. "He looks exactly like my fertility doctor. Like, dear Carter, isn't that your husband?" I felt my pulse skip. I took the paper and studied the grainy headshot. Brown hair, strong jaw, slight dimple on the left. The photo was clearly old, probably a decade ago, but it hit me like a fist to the chest. It was Greg. My Greg. I kept my face still, calm. Years of practice. I told her I'd look into it, that sometimes clients project their anxiety onto patterns that aren't really there. We wrapped the session scheduled next week. I held it together until she left. That night, after Lily was asleep and Greg was at the hospital for a late consult, I sat alone at the kitchen table, my laptop glowing in the dark. I typed the donor ID into the registry. No name, just the photo. The same face I'd just seen on that flimsy printout. Same dimple. Same eyes. Same crooked smile that used to melt me. My hands trembled as I stared. For a moment I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe it was a look-alike. Or a mistake in the system. But the truth wrapped itself around my throat and squeezed. I zoomed in on the photo. I knew that tie. I bought him that tie. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned, until my glass of wine went warm and untouched beside me. I knew that face. That smirk. That chin. It was him. And if he lied about this, about something so sacred, so deeply connected to who we are as a family, then I had to ask, what else has he lied about? We were the kind of family people described as solid. The couple at school pickup who still held hands. The neighbors who hosted block parties, who showed up with cookies at Christmas. The Bennetts. On the outside, everything was neat and symmetrical. On the inside, felt that way too, at least it used to. Greg and I met during our residency years. I was finishing clinical hours in child psychology. He was rotating through his third year of reproductive endocrinology. He had this calm, confident way of speaking, like the world would eventually make sense if you just gave it time. We dated through his fellowship. I remember the late-night ramen, the shared dreams about a future house, a daughter named Lily. He proposed in the waiting room of a fertility clinic after one of my patients had a breakthrough. Said it felt poetic. I said yes through tears. We got married under a cedar tree in a small garden in Queen Anne, with only 30 guests and 2 dogs in tuxedos. It was simple. It was beautiful. And it was real, at least it felt real. Our journey to have Lily wasn't easy. After 2 years of trying multiple tests and tears spilled on bathroom floors, we turned to IVF. The first round failed. The second failed harder. By the third, I stopped getting my hopes up. Greg was supportive, reassuring. He told me, "We'll be parents, Chloe. One way or another. I promise." When our doctor suggested a sperm donor, he was hesitant. Said he needed time. A week later, he came home with a file and said, "Let's do this." I remember asking, "Are you sure?" He smiled, pulled me in close. "We'll never regret creating a life. Only missing the chance to try." So we tried. And it worked. Lily was born on a wet January morning with a full head of dark hair and lungs that could crack the sky. She was everything. She still is. Greg was instantly wrapped around her tiny finger. He read her medical journals as bedtime stories when she was still in the bassinet. He sang lullabies with off-key lyrics. He learned to braid her hair for picture day. People used to say, "You two make such a team." And we did. But now I look back and I question everything. I rewatch our memories like crime scenes, hunting for evidence I missed. Was he already lying then? Was the donor search just a performance? Did he ever intend to use someone else? The week after Emily's session, I started noticing the small things. Greg changed his phone passcode. He started locking his desk drawers at home, something he'd never done before. He became more careful about his screens around me, about closing folders on his laptop when I walked by. And every time I tried to bring up anything from our past, Lily's birth, our early IVF struggles, he'd redirect. "I don't live in nostalgia," he said once, brushing me off with a half-smile. "What matters is what we have now." At first, I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being dramatic. But late one night, while putting Lily's backpack away, I found a folded piece of construction paper inside. It was her school project, a family tree. She'd drawn Greg and me at the top, smiling faces in marker. Below she wrote, "Mom is the heart. Dad is the seed." Seed. I sat on the floor and stared at those words until my eyes blurred. Greg walked in and found me there. "Everything okay?" he asked, setting down his keys. I smiled, nodded, folded the paper up carefully. "Just feeling proud." He smiled back. But that smile, the one I used to love, now felt hollow. Or maybe it always was. That night, I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, counting every time he shifted in his sleep. And I knew deep down I couldn't ask him for the truth. I had to find it myself. There's a particular kind of silence that settles in your bones when suspicion takes hold. It's not loud or messy. It's surgical, precise. A quiet pulling away from everything familiar, from the man beside you, from your own past. That's the kind of silence I lived in for weeks. I didn't ask Greg about the donor profile. Not directly. I couldn't, not without tipping my hand. I needed to be certain, to build a reality stronger than my fear. So I watched. Closely. Greg had always been meticulous. Every drawer in his home office labeled, every spreadsheet color-coded. But suddenly new patterns emerged. He started taking phone calls in the garage, whispering behind closed doors. His laptop rarely left his side. The desk drawer that used to hold old family birthday cards was now locked. When I asked about it, he smiled. "I'm trying to be better about patient privacy. Can't leave charts lying around." Reasonable. Too reasonable. That's when I knew I wasn't just being paranoid. One night, I waited until Greg went to bed. I told him I'd be working late on patient notes. He kissed me on the forehead, completely unaware. The moment our bedroom door clicked shut, I walked quietly to his office. The laptop sat on the desk, humming softly. I didn't know the new password, but I did know Greg. He had this habit of using significant dates for things. Passwords, alarm codes, even fantasy football pics. I tried Lily's birthday. Wrong. Our anniversary. Wrong again. Then I tried January 13th, Lily's due date. The screen blinked and unlocked. My stomach flipped. Inside were folders, dozens of them. Some labeled by year. Others by donor ID. I opened one marked 112A, active cycles. It was like stepping into a hidden world. Each folder contained patient names, fertility cycle logs, procedural details, embryo transfers, birth dates, all linked to a donor, donor 112. But this wasn't just any donor. This was Greg. I printed nothing. I took no screenshots. I knew better. Instead, I memorized, watched, read between the lines. In one file, a woman named Kara had noted, "He seemed so confident it would work this time. Said he personally monitored the donor sample." In another, I asked if I could see the donor profile again. He said it wasn't necessary. He already chose the right one. Page after page, line after line. They trusted him. He made them feel chosen. Special. My hands were trembling. Not with rage yet, but with disbelief. He didn't just lie to me. He played God. I shut the laptop and returned it exactly as I found it. That night, I stared at the ceiling and listened to the steady breathing of the man I married. And I realized I didn't know him at all. The next step was harder. I ordered a home DNA testing kit for Lily. Just a curiosity project, I told Greg. For school. She's doing a unit on genetics. He didn't question it. He rarely did when it came to Lily. A week later, the results arrived in my inbox. I waited until Greg was at the hospital. I clicked, and my heart stopped. No paternal match. Not even partial. Greg wasn't Lily's biological father. It was one thing to suspect, to theorize. It was another to see it in sterile statistical certainty. I sat on the floor in the hallway, knees pulled to my chest, and cried until my throat hurt. The next morning I called in sick. I needed space to think. I drove across town to a park Lily loved. It was empty. Just a few birds and the wind pushing through the swings. I sat on a bench and watched the slide she once called the rainbow slide. Back when she couldn't pronounce her R's. My daughter. My miracle. I had built my world around her. And now that world felt like a lie. Was she still my daughter? Of course. But something in me cracked. An old wound reopening in a new place. Not because of who Lily was, but because of what Greg took from me. He didn't just lie. He stole my choice. I wasn't ready to confront him. Not yet. So I turned to someone who might help me understand just how deep this went. I made a few quiet inquiries at the hospital, under the guise of a potential research paper on fertility ethics. After a few dodged calls and vague redirections, one name kept coming up. Dear Jonah Marks. Jonah had been Greg's colleague 5 years ago at the clinic. He disappeared suddenly, no one really knew why. Rumors said he had a breakdown. Others whispered about disagreements with leadership. I tracked him down. He was working at a modest family clinic 40 minutes outside Seattle. I made an appointment using my maiden name. Asked to speak to him in private. He recognized me immediately. "Chloe," he said, his face pale. "I wondered when you'd come." That hit me harder than I expected. "You knew?" I asked. "I suspected," he said softly. "But back then I didn't have proof. Only patterns. Quiet substitutions. Patients who weren't told the full story. Why didn't you come forward?" He smiled bitterly. "I tried. Ethics board. Hospital administration. Even the press. Greg had connections. I didn't." He opened a locked drawer and handed me a flash drive. "These are the records I managed to save before I was forced out. You'll find donor logs, cycle reports, and consent form inconsistencies. I think you'll recognize the pattern." I held the flash drive like it was radioactive. "Why me?" I whispered. "Why would he do this to me?" Jonah looked at me, something almost kind in his eyes. "Because he doesn't see it as a betrayal. He sees it as perfection." That night I didn't speak to Greg. I sat beside him during dinner, listened to him describe a tough embryo transfer, and nodded like I always did. But inside something had shifted. I wasn't grieving anymore. I was preparing. I used to think betrayal was a clean break, like a slammed door or a sharp slap. But Greg's betrayal was something else entirely. It was slow, cumulative, a quiet invasion of everything sacred. Our marriage, our family, our child's very DNA. And now I knew he hadn't just done it to me. He'd done it to dozens of women. Maybe more. I spent a full weekend digging through the flash drive Jonah gave me. It felt like watching a horror film of my own life on repeat. Patient numbers, fertility logs, consent forms with faint signatures I couldn't quite trust. Over 20 files marked with the same donor ID, 112A. And the most horrifying part? Some of the names were familiar. Women I had met at hospital functions. Clients who'd once confided in me during therapy. Women who smiled at Greg like he had given them a miracle. And in a twisted way he had. He had inserted himself into their lives in the most literal, intimate, irreversible way possible. They had no idea. I started reaching out. Quietly. At first, I crafted an email template, vague, professional, easy to dismiss if someone became uncomfortable. Hello. My name is Chloe Bennett. I'm conducting a confidential review of fertility cases linked to donor 112. I believe your cycle may be related. If you're willing to speak, please respond. I created a burner account. Sent 10 emails. 5 bounced back. 4 ignored me. But 1 responded. Her name was Rachel Connors. We met at a coffee shop near Pike Place Market. She wore a navy sweater, no makeup, a ponytail that looked like it hadn't seen a brush in days. But her eyes were sharp, searching. Why me? She asked, wrapping her hands around a paper cup. I slid a printout across the table. It was a DNA analysis, one that matched her son to donor 112A. I watched her face crumble as she read. She looked up, lips trembling. You're saying my son is his? I nodded slowly. She let out a short, bitter laugh. He told me we were lucky, that the donor was special, selected just for us. He told me the same thing, I said. Except he was also my husband. Rachel stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. Jesus Christ. He's your? You had a child with him. I nodded again. Silence passed between us. Not awkward. Just heavy. Then she whispered, I feel sick. And I knew exactly what she meant. In the next 2 weeks I met 4 more women. Each story was eerily similar. Each woman had been made to feel chosen, prioritized. You're a perfect candidate for this donor, Greg had said. Your biology matches beautifully with his. Some were single. Some married. Some divorced now. Men who suspected something was off but never questioned it aloud. One woman, Anjali Desai, an oncology nurse, pulled out a manila envelope and handed me a lab report. My daughter has a rare blood condition, she said. Totally unexpected. Not in my family. Not in the donor's file either. She looked at me. Now I know why. The worst was Ellen Blake, a soft-spoken librarian with a nervous laugh. She had twins and a mountain of guilt. Her husband had passed away 2 years ago from liver cancer, and she'd always worried the stress of IVF had contributed. He was never comfortable with the donor process, she said. But I wanted children so badly. When I showed her the results, she didn't cry. She just stared blankly, like someone had removed the floor beneath her. I need to leave, she whispered. I can't process this right now. And she walked out of the cafe without looking back. I didn't follow, because what could I possibly say? In every meeting I saw echoes of myself. Women who trusted, who hoped, who believed in the promise of science. Women who weren't stupid, just vulnerable. Women who thought their doctor was on their side. Instead, he used us. All of us. One night, while Lily was asleep, I went into Greg's office again. This time I wasn't interested in digital files. I wanted something tangible. In the back of the bottom drawer behind old case journals and tax files, I found a leather-bound notebook. It was heavy. Used. I flipped it open. Inside were pages and pages of handwritten notes, organized by date, marked with initials and birth months. But this wasn't a patient log. It was a legacy catalog. DC March 2015 High Math Aptitude. Arza loves music, mild asthma. LB. Possible color blindness, excellent hand-eye coordination. Each entry had a child's initials, personality traits, medical notes, progress updates. These were his children, and he'd been watching them, tracking them, curating them like some twisted version of natural selection, not as a father, but as a creator. I felt bile rise in my throat. This wasn't about desperation or isolated ethics violations. This was obsession, control, power. Greg didn't just lie to me, or to the mothers he'd deceived. He saw himself as better, smarter, entitled to the genes he was passing on. And the terrifying part? He didn't think he was doing anything wrong. I confronted Jonah again. Met him outside his clinic late one afternoon. "I need you to help me bring him down," I said. Jonah looked wary. "Greg's protected. His name's on 3 research boards, a hospital wing, and half a dozen donor awards. You don't just burn a man like that without getting burned yourself." "I'm not just trying to burn him," I said. "I want the whole structure to fall." He studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded. "There's one more thing," he said, reaching into his coat pocket. "I've been holding on to this in case something ever happened to me." He handed me a flash drive. Internal communication logs, audio memos, recordings from board meetings. You'll find donor discrepancies discussed and covered up. I stared at it, stunned. "Why didn't you give me this before?" He looked down at the ground. "Because you weren't ready." He was right. 2 months ago, I would have turned this all in anonymously. Now I knew what I had to do. Because this wasn't just about me, or Greg, or even Lily. It was about every woman who ever walked into a fertility clinic and placed her hope in the hands of a man in a white coat. And it was about every child born from that decision without consent, without truth. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was done watching, done crying, done pretending. Greg had spent a decade crafting his secret legacy. Now I was going to dismantle it brick by brick. There's a moment when fear burns off and all that's left is clarity. It doesn't arrive with fanfare. It's not dramatic, just quiet, precise. I reached that moment the night I sat cross-legged on our living room floor, surrounded by folders, flash drives, and the names of 23 women, all unknowingly tied to my husband's DNA. No more hiding. No more waiting. Greg had built his kingdom in the shadows. I would burn it down in the spotlight. I didn't tell anyone, not even the women I'd spoken to, that I was planning something public. They had already suffered enough. Some still hadn't decided what to do. I respected that. But I had made my choice. I contacted an investigative journalist named Morgan Tate, a reporter with a reputation for taking down medical fraud cases. I told her I had a story. We met in a quiet corner booth at a diner downtown. I slid her a flash drive labeled "The Seed of Deceit." That was Jonah's title. Kept it. I watched her eyes widen as she clicked through files on her laptop. DNA matches, audio recordings, Greg's donor registry submissions. "This is monumental," she whispered. "You're sure you want to go public?" "I don't just want it," I said. "I need it." Morgan nodded slowly. "We'll verify everything independently. But if this checks out, it's not just ethical malpractice. It's criminal. Potentially federal." Good. That's exactly what I wanted. But the story alone wasn't enough. I needed a stage. And fate, it seemed, was on my side. A month later, I received an invitation in the mail. The annual Pacific Northwest Fertility Conference, hosted at the same hospital where Greg practiced, where he built his reputation, where Lily had once toddled through the halls while nurses cooed. She looks just like him. Greg had been selected to give the keynote address. Modern medicine and the miracle of fatherhood. You couldn't make this stuff up. He was thrilled, of course. "I'll keep it short," he said, stirring his coffee one morning. "No one wants to hear me preach." I smiled across the breakfast table. "Are you kidding?" You've practically trademarked the word miracle. He laughed. I didn't. Over the next 3 weeks, I played the part. The devoted wife. The supportive partner. I bought him a new tie for his speech, navy blue with silver dots. His power color. He kissed my cheek and said I still had the best taste. At night, after he fell asleep, I emailed Morgan. I organized files. I built a timeline of deceit, from our IVF rounds to his first recorded donor substitution, to the births of the children he never intended to claim. I created a new file labeled Legacy Project. Collapse. I smiled when I saved it. The day of the conference arrived like a slow-building storm. The hotel ballroom was pristine white linens, floral centerpieces, banners in soft golds and blues. Doctors, researchers, administrators. I recognized most of them. So did Greg. He shook hands like a man who'd already won. I wore a black sheath dress and the diamond earrings he'd given me on our 10th anniversary. As I walked beside him, heels silent on the carpet, I wasn't nervous. I was focused. Everything was ready. Greg took the stage with a practiced smile and confident gait. He thanked the board, the audience, his team. He cracked a joke about sleepless nights and diaper duty. The room chuckled politely. He clicked to the first slide of his PowerPoint. A photo of a baby gripping an adult's finger. Every child deserves a beginning, he said, his voice steady. Every parent deserves hope. I slipped out the side door and met Morgan in the hallway. She handed me a small remote and gave me a single nod. Then I walked back into the ballroom unnoticed and took my seat near the front. I waited for him to advance to his final slide. He clicked. The screen went black. Then a new slide appeared, one he hadn't made. It was a title card. The Real Legacy, Donor 112. Gasps. Greg blinked. What the hell? He muttered, turning toward the AV technician, but it was too late. Slide after slide began to play. DNA match reports, his donor ID linked to multiple families, consent forms, missing signatures manipulated by his hand, photos of children side by side with Greg's younger headshots, audio clips of Greg recommending a personally vetted donor, and finally, a scan of his private notebook, the leather-bound log of legacy. Each page filled with notes on the children he never claimed but always watched. The ballroom was dead silent. Until someone whispered, "That's him. That's Greg Carter." Greg stumbled over the microphone. This is a fabrication," he said, his voice cracking. "It's taken out of context. It's not what it looks like." I stood, calm, collected. "I'm Chloe Bennett," I said, loud enough for every corner of the room to hear. "Greg's wife, and the mother of one of these children." Dozens of heads turned. Greg stared at me, pale, speechless. "I was his first victim," I continued. "He used his own genetic material in our IVF cycle without my knowledge or consent. And he did it again. And again. And again." Greg took a step forward, hand outstretched. "Chloe, stop." I didn't. He stole autonomy from every woman he manipulated. He saw patients as vessels for his own ego. He built a genetic empire in secret, and he thought none of us would ever notice. Security moved toward the stage. Morgan appeared beside me and nodded to the event manager. The screen went dark. Greg was escorted off stage. His face flushed, his tie askew, sweat beading at his temple. I followed him with my eyes but didn't move. Not until I saw the look in his. It wasn't shame. It was fury. But he couldn't touch me anymore. The fallout was immediate. That night, Morgan published her article. It went viral. By morning, Greg was trending on social media. The donor doctor. The father of 30. Seattle's fertility fraud. His medical license was suspended pending investigation. A class action lawsuit was filed by 10 families within the week. The hospital launched a full audit. Greg moved out 3 days later. He left a note on the counter that said, "You didn't have to do it like this." I laughed when I read it, because this was the only way. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't broken. I was free. And for the first time in 15 years, I was ready to stop being his wife and start being myself. It took 3 days for the media to reach my doorstep. They came with microphones, flashing lights, questions I wasn't ready to answer, not yet. I kept the curtains drawn. I let the phone go to voicemail. And I sat silently, watching Lily draw at the kitchen table with a pink crayon in one hand and peanut butter on her cheek. She was humming. Carefree. Untouched. Still mine. Greg called once. Left a voicemail. "This didn't have to happen, Chloe. You made it public. You made it personal." He didn't understand. It was always personal. He hadn't just violated a law or a code of ethics. He had violated me, my marriage, my motherhood, my memories. Every bedtime story. Every ultrasound photo. Every whispered, "We made her." A lie. And still, I loved Lily more than anything on this earth. Which meant I had to tell her the truth. I waited until after dinner. We sat in her room, surrounded by stuffed animals and soft light. She held her favorite elephant, Mr. Peanuts, close to her chest. "Sweetheart," I said gently, "I want to talk to you about something important. About how you came to be." She tilted her head, curious but not afraid. I told her everything, or as much as a child could hold. That mommy and daddy had helped having her. That sometimes people need a little science and a lot of hope. That her dad used something that wasn't his but never told me. She was quiet for a long time. Then she looked up and asked, "So, does that mean daddy's not really my daddy?" Tears stung my eyes. "Not by blood," I whispered. "But he was there. He read you stories. Held your hand. He chose to love you." She nodded. "And then God bless this child," she said. "But you're still my real mom, right?" I smiled. "Forever and ever." She hugged me tight, and for the first time in weeks I exhaled. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from the Washington State Medical Board. They were formally revoking Greg's license and opening an inquiry into the fertility clinic. Jonah was asked to testify. So was I. I brought Rachel and Anjali with me, 2 women who had once cried in cafes and now stood tall in heels and blazers. We weren't just victims anymore. We were witnesses, builders of truth. The fallout widened. More women came forward. More children. A wave of lawsuits followed, civil, criminal, national headlines. Seattle's shame. The legacy that lied. Greg's reputation was gone. His assets frozen. His face splashed across morning news cycles beside words like predator, violator, and fraud. And I was still here. Still standing. Morgan Tate, the journalist, offered me a follow-up feature. A book deal came in. A podcast interview. A Netflix docuseries. I said no to all of them. Because this story wasn't for entertainment. It was for the women still silently wondering if their child's eyes looked too familiar. It was for every woman who signed a consent form she never fully understood. It was for the little girl in my house who needed to know that truth can hurt, but it can also heal. 3 months later, I was invited to speak at the Ethics in Reproductive Medicine Summit. Not as a victim. Not as Greg's ex-wife. As a voice. A leader. Jonah stood beside me at the podium. "We need oversight," he said. "Transparency. Laws with teeth." I stepped forward, my hand steady. "And we need women to stop apologizing for wanting answers. This isn't revenge. This is reclamation." Applause. It didn't feel like justice, not entirely. But it felt like power. And I could live with that. That night, I came home to Lily asleep on the couch. Mr. Peanuts in one arm. A blanket half off her shoulder. I kissed her forehead. In the kitchen I found an envelope. No return address. Inside was a single page. Typed, "I think I might be one of them. I was born in 2012. My mom used the clinic. Should I get tested? I don't know who to talk to. I found your name in the article. I hope it's okay." There was no signature. No name. Just fear. And trust. I folded the letter slowly and looked out the window into the quiet Seattle night. Then I turned on the lamp, opened my laptop and wrote back. "Yes. You should know. You deserve to know. And I'm here if you need someone to walk beside you." Greg built his legacy in silence and shadows. I was going to build mine in daylight. One truth at a time. I used to believe legacy was something you built like a house, a career, a family. But now I know better. Legacy is not what you leave behind. It's what you hide, and what survives you anyway. Greg built his in silence, in secrecy, brick by brick, using the trust of women who came to him vulnerable, desperate, hopeful. He saw himself as the architect of miracles. He forgot he was just a man. But the truth? It has a way of bleeding through, no matter how tightly you wrap the lie. This story isn't just mine. It belongs to every woman who felt betrayed by science. Every mother who looked into her child's eyes and saw a question staring back. Every person who's ever been denied the right to choose the truth. And it's for every daughter like mine, born from broken promises, but raised with unwavering love. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know how many children will grow up one day asking who they really are. But I do know this. We are more than DNA. We are the choices we make when the truth is unbearable. We are the strength it takes to face it anyway. And sometimes we are the fire that burns down the illusion, so that something honest can finally rise from the ash.